It's a treatment for acne, a treatment for aging skin, a treatment for leukemia. Patented in 1957 and on the market since 1962, it's called tretinoin. And with more than 2 million prescriptions filed every year, it's one of America's most popular drugs. But you might know it better by the name Retin-A. Now, what you might not know is how the man who developed it and patented tretinoin, Dr. Albert Kligman, tested his new drug. He was a dermatologist at the University of Pennsylvania, and his partner in the venture was another physician named Dr. James Fulton. Fulton had battled severe acne as a teenager, and he was on fire to find a medication that would spare others that same torment. Tretinoin, Retin-A, it's so commonplace now, so routine and regular and everyday that we just take for granted that this near miracle treatment for acne is widely available. But once it was new and unproven. Would it work? Was it safe? Doctors Kligman and Fulton needed to test their discovery. How lucky for them that there just happened to be funding available from a government agency that specialized in turning a blind eye to unlawful experiments on human beings. And, even more convenient, they had a whole pool of test subjects, thousands of them, all in one place.
Scores of men, bare-chested in the heat, their backs and shoulders and arms striped with gauze pads and adhesive tape.
Those men were inmates at a prison in Philadelphia. A prison so chaotic, so violent and notorious that it more than lived up to its nickname. Welcome to the Terrordome.
And make out a small beam of light against the mirror.
Truly weird stuff.
All I saw before me were acres of skin. It was like a farmer seeing a fertile field for the first time.
That's Dr. Albert Kligman. In 1951, he was contacted by the pharmacist at Holmesburg Prison in Philadelphia. Athlete's foot was rampaging through the inmate population, and none of the usual remedies were even making a dent in the problem. Dr. Kligman wasn't chosen at random for the task. The pharmacist had done his homework. Kligman had been researching ringworm, which is a fungal infection and a cousin to athlete's foot. Kligman, who'd been a little bit obsessed with fungi in general before becoming a doctor, succeeded in modifying an existing laboratory test to detect ringworm and other fungal infections. Kligman was all, if you can correctly detect it, then you can treat it and stop the spread. Which might sound like, well, duh, to our modern ears. But ringworm? Ringworm is an ancient little nasty. We have fossil evidence of ringworm that dates back more than 125 million years. So give Kligman some credit for making progress against one of humanity's crustier old, horribly contagious enemies. When the call came from the prison, Kligman was busy working on the problem of fungal infections in fingernails. So really, who better to tackle about 1,000 cases of athlete's foot? And so, on that fateful day in 1951, Kligman made the trip from his office at the University of Pennsylvania to Holmesburg Prison. It was just another day, just another consultation on his already packed calendar. Kligman didn't know and couldn't know that this one decision would change not only his life, but the lives of hundreds of men, and then hundreds of thousands of other lives, including maybe yours. What Dr. Kligman saw as he was toured through the facilities and cell blocks at Holmesburg Prison was incredible potential for experimentation. Here was a captive population of men whose daily routines, diet, and behavior were all strictly controlled. It was just about ideal, and Kligman instantly saw the possibilities.
An anthropoid colony, mainly healthy and under perfect control conditions.
Anthropoid colony?
Anthropoid, belonging or pertaining to the group of primates characterized by a relatively flat face, dry nose, small immobile ears, and forward-facing eyes, comprising New World monkeys, Old World monkeys, and apes, including humans.
Well, Kligman was no stranger to running experiments on anthropoid colonies. That ringworm research that brought him so much attention and regard, the test subjects were disabled children housed at a state mental hospital.
The experimental circumstances were ideal. The confined children could be infected and biopsied at will.
The children were infected, according to a colleague of Kligman's at the University of Pennsylvania, by roughing up their scalps and rubbing the fungus directly into the wounds.
The ringworm could be minutely studied from its very onset.
Kligman was happy to trade his experiments on institutionalized children for experiments on imprisoned men. Pharmaceutical companies, for example, were willing to pour fortunes into those experiments. And at least his new test subjects at Holmesburg Prison were adults. Although, just in case you're hoping that these inmates were the worst of the worst, because that might make it easier to live with what's about to happen, well, bad news. Many of the inmates at Holmesburg were simply awaiting trial. They hadn't yet been convicted of anything. Many of the inmates at Holmesburg were there because they were either denied bail or couldn't pay their bail. Not that Holmesburg hadn't earned its reputation or its nickname, the Terrordome. The prison was opened in 1896, designed and built on a spoke and wheel layout meant to isolate prisoners. Cells were small and very quickly became overcrowded, with the only light coming from narrow slits in the ceiling. Conditions were miserable, and 1928 saw the first of many riots at Holmesburg. Things didn't improve, and in 1938, prisoners launched a hunger strike. Roughly half of the inmates at Holmesburg joined in, protesting the rank and insufficient food they were given. Prison officials were like, "Oh, hell no, you don't." The punishment they came up with for the leaders of this hunger strike was downright medieval. 25 inmates were yanked from their cells and dragged to a narrow cell block called the Klondike. It was lined on both sides with heavy steam pipes and radiators. Guards set about locking down the windows and sealing off every ventilation grill. It was August, and Philadelphia was in the grip of a massive, sticky, relentless heat wave. The temperature inside the Klondike climbed and climbed, hitting nearly 200 degrees Fahrenheit. The prisoners locked inside suffered horribly, and 4 died. An inquest found that the men had not only been severely beaten, their injuries were consistent with being boiled alive. The public uproar was loud enough to reach the state governor's mansion in Harrisburg. Governor Earl came to Philadelphia to see for himself and was shaken and appalled. He declared that, if anything, the press had understated the horror of the death of 4 men. An investigation saw 14 prison staffers charged with criminal offenses, though only 2 were ever convicted. Fast forward now, just 13 years to 1951. Very little had changed at Holmesburg. The Klondike still stood. The cells were still overcrowded. Conditions were still rough at best. In the beginning, Kligman's experiments at Holmesburg Prison were fairly benign. Cosmetics mostly, perfumes, that sort of thing. After all, Kligman was a dermatologist, not a mad scientist. He seemed to make peace with the fact that his subjects were human beings with no real knowledge or understanding of what they were agreeing to by pointing out that every participating inmate was being paid compensation in lieu of informed consent.
Prisoners were more than eager to gamble their health for pay. At Holmesburg, the going rate was $10 to $300, depending on the experiment, a fortune compared with the jail's normal wages of 15 cents or 25 cents a day.
For men desperate to raise the money needed to make bail, this seemed like a pretty good deal. For inmates already convicted and serving their sentences, this was a golden opportunity to provide for family on the outside or to build a nest egg for their own eventual release. People with money love to say that it doesn't buy happiness, but people without money know that happiness aside, it sure does have a way of solving a few problems. Plus, even $10, the lowest end of the Holmesburg experiment pay scale, in the 1950s, that $10 spent like about $120 today. An inmate earning $300 for playing human guinea pig was pulling down the equivalent of well over $3,000 in today's money. What might you agree to for that? Kligman liked to tell his students at University of Pennsylvania, rules don't apply to genius.
I began to go to the prison regularly, although I had no authorization.
A common test was what the inmates called a patch test. Strips of hospital tape were stuck to an inmate's upper back, forming a grid with about 30 squares. On each square went a dab of lotion.
Lotions that ranged from, moisturizers to sunscreens, just a whole variety of topical products.
Then came heat from a sun lamp. Doctors checked the skin for peeling, burning, and blistering at different temperatures.
If I told you that this was happening to sweet little bunny rabbits in labs, you'd be so outraged. But let's be real with each other, please, and admit that an uncomfortably large percentage of us don't even flinch at hearing about this happening to inmates, because our culture has done a first-rate job of dehumanizing incarcerated people. And when you learn next that the majority of Kligman's test subjects at Holmesburg Prison were black men, well, that little pile of give-a-damn just got even smaller. You know it's true. And so did everyone involved, including the United States Army and the CIA. They just haven't shown up at this party yet, but they're coming, and not to test out new soaps and lotions. So, what makes Dr. Kligman such an interesting and complicated figure is just how much good he managed to accomplish, even as he treated the inmates at Holmesburg like lab rats. How many inmates? Try 9 out of every 10. A little more than a decade into his prison research, this news broke in 1963.
Holmesburg Prison inmates in the past year have helped develop a shortening product that curbs formation of cholesterol in the blood, a better and cheaper synthetic penicillin, and improved antibiotics.
See, he's doing good. And by this point, Holmesburg had become a sort of supermarket clearinghouse for human experimentation. Funding poured in from Dow Chemical, Johnson & Johnson, and dozens of pharmaceutical companies. There was the so-called milkshake test. Those inmates were isolated in a special cell block for 6 months and fed nothing but a milkshake-type drink 3 times a day. The men were not told what the ingredients were, but one inmate who participated wondered years later if maybe he wasn't part of the first round of safety testing for protein shakes. That doesn't sound so bad, right? And maybe some people will hear that and think, they're criminals. Why are my tax dollars paying for some crook to lay around drinking protein shakes all day? Put him to work. Bring back that chain gang. Okay, yeah, 6 months of nothing but protein shakes. Boo-hoo. Oh, sure, at least one of the 10 men involved ended up needing multiple surgeries to repair the massive hemorrhoids he developed as a result of consuming nothing but a protein slurry for half a year. But it's only hemorrhoids. Get over it. Honestly, some of y'all are just mean to the core. Let's take a look at another experiment, this one funded by Johnson & Johnson. Their iconic baby powder on the market since 1894 was an iconic feature in every nursery. It contained talc, a mineral found in rock deposits all over the world. Talc is the softest mineral on Earth, and it naturally has a little bit of a greasy or soapy feel. Talc is mined all over the United States, from Montana to Alabama, with a heavy concentration in the Appalachians. Here's why this seemingly random info dump is important. Talc and asbestos are often close neighbors in the Earth's crust. Take the talc, risk asbestos contamination. And asbestos is a carcinogen. Researchers first discovered that in 1934, although it would be 8 more years before the public would be notified of the risk. And here's Johnson & Johnson baby powder, all that sweet-smelling talcum powder that Americans had been cheerfully sprinkling on their babies and themselves for decades. A cloud of perfume dust that just might have been laced with asbestos fibers. Uh-oh. But Johnson & Johnson hedged. Asbestos, that naturally occurring mineral, might be present in their talc, but would it be present in levels high enough to cause cancer? To this day, the company denies that their baby powder contained asbestos. But back in 1971, Johnson & Johnson stroked a big fat check to Dr. Kligman, who set about to answer that question. 10 inmates were paid $10 to be injected with talcum powder and 2 different types of asbestos, tremolite and chrysolite. Chrysolite, also known as white asbestos, might not be the most dangerous form, but it's responsible for causing the most cases of mesothelioma in the United States. Chrysolite asbestos is the bad boy you find in buildings, for example. Tremolite, on the other hand, is rarely added to products, though it does show up in insulation and sealants and bags of potting soil. But it's tremolite asbestos that's most likely to contaminate talc during mining. So, for $10, those men were injected with a known carcinogen. What happened? Not surprisingly, the chrysolite asbestos injections had the most dramatic impact, causing raised clumps on the skin. Granuloma is the technical term. Since the inmates who participated weren't followed long-term, it's impossible to say what other consequences there may have been. Johnson & Johnson began fighting a mountain of lawsuits in 1999, changed their iconic baby powder formula, swapping talc for cornstarch in 2020, and has paid out billions, that's billions with a B, billions of dollars to settle the growing pile of lawsuits. While the company has never publicly admitted to finding any trace of asbestos in their baby powder, it was there. And Johnson & Johnson knew it as far back as the 1950s, when high levels of tremolite asbestos fibers were discovered in some of their product samples. Some, but not all, screamed Johnson & Johnson, not all samples. Some. And consumers deserve to know that the risk existed. They had the right to know, didn't they? Whether or not they were sprinkling asbestos fibers on their own bodies or the bodies of their children. And listen, Johnson & Johnson only got caught in the lie about asbestos in their baby powder because journalists at Reuters clamped onto the story like a starving dog on a bone and dragged that truth into the light. Remember that the next time someone tells you how much the media sucks, which it does now, like really, really hard. But it used to be better. It used to serve the public, not gaslight us. Anyway, back to Holmesburg Prison and the illustrious Dr. Kligman.
My use of paid prisoners as research subjects in the 1950s and 1960s was in keeping with the nation's standard protocol for conducting scientific investigations at the time.
You know, to be fair, Kligman was correct, or mostly correct. Oh, sure, the Nuremberg Code of 1947 laid down the 10 things necessary for ethical human experimentation, one of which was informed consent. But in the research community, the Nuremberg Code was thought to apply to war criminals, not just scientists, doctors, and those trying to better humanity. The whole idea of informed consent didn't even enter the conversation in this country until about 1957. Federal legislation to protect human subjects wasn't even passed until 1974, when the National Research Act became law. Timing is everything. And Kligman's, well, his timing was pretty much perfect. There was a gray area between the atrocities of World War II and the legal and ethical crackdowns on biomedical experiments with human subjects that came in the 1970s. That gray area is where Kligman operated, and he had company. Big, scary, infinitely well-funded company. In 1968, the Department of Defense, in partnership with the Central Intelligence Agency, created a new covert program called MK Often. The stated goal was to test the behavioral and toxicological effects of certain drugs on animals and humans, agents of biochemical warfare. But since the CIA was involved, and everything the Cold War CIA touched got super weird super fast, you know that a little mind control was in the mix too. From a 1977 memorandum prepared by the General Counsel for the Department of Defense.
There were 3 such programs in which the Army participated over the period 1969 to 1973. 5 such programs in which the Navy participated over the period 1947 to 1973. It appears from the documents that the 3 code word projects of the Central Intelligence Agency, identified by the director in his testimony as basically Department of Defense projects, were, in fact, planned, directed, and controlled by the Central Intelligence Agency.
Does this memo specifically call out the CIA's obsession with mind control, though? It does.
All relating to experiments using human subjects in which drugs were tested for mind control and behavior modification purposes.
Project MK Often was embedded in MK Search, the CIA program that was the successor to the famous, or I think we should say infamous, MK Ultra program. You know, the one where unsuspecting Johns were dosed with LSD and interrogated by sex workers on the government payroll. MK Ultra also brought us the brainwashing horrors at Ravenscroft Hospital in Canada. And since we're doing the greatest hits, let's don't leave out that classic involving patients at Ionia State Hospital in Michigan, declared criminally insane by the state. 140 of those individuals spent years being dosed with both LSD and cannabis, followed by long interrogations. Not one patient consented, and not one was informed that they would be drugged, much less what the long-term consequences might be of ingesting so many high doses of LSD. Whatever. They were prisoners, right? Do the crime, do the human guinea pig time. I'm just saying, some of y'all are as mean as snakes. Anyhoosers, MK Search, according to the Department of Defense, seemingly just picked up where MK Ultra left off.
The objective of the project was to develop a capability to manipulate human behavior in a predictable manner through the use of drugs.
And MK Often?
Its objective was to test the behavioral and toxicological effects of certain drugs on animals and humans.
And this is where Kligman's experiments on the inmates at Holmesburg Prison turn away from face creams and sunscreens and perfumes to stuff like dioxin, one of the poisonous chemical ingredients in Agent Orange. The Holmesburg inmates were, remember, paid for their participation. They just weren't informed as to what they were agreeing to. The forms given to the participants in the dioxin study made no mention of Agent Orange, no mention of side effects, no acknowledgement at all that the material was highly toxic.
Dioxin, a chemical byproduct found in some herbicides, has proved lethal in small doses to laboratory animals. But there has been no proof that exposure harms humans, aside from causing a skin condition known as chloracne. More serious effects, however, have been suspected, including cancer and liver and kidney damage. Many veterans, among 20,000 who have filed a joint suit against several chemical companies, have attributed a variety of ailments, including birth defects in their children and malignant tumors, to exposure to dioxin in Agent Orange.
Dow Chemical paid Dr. Kligman $10,000 for these dioxin experiments. We don't know what the inmates were paid. We also don't know their names. Isn't it funny how records of things like this just have a way of getting misplaced? We do know that some of the men were also subjected to skin testing with the most potent of 75 dioxin compounds in use. It's called TCDD, or 2,3,7,8 tetrachlorodibenzo P-dioxin.
Science!
Dow Chemical, by the way, had only approved an incremental and conservative testing protocol. They wanted to know if there was any safe level of exposure to the chemical. But the ambitious Dr. Kligman went far beyond that. When his prisoners showed no response to low levels of TCDD, he went ahead and increased the dosage 500-fold. Because why not? And ta-da! Big results.
8 of the 10 prisoners developed lesions. 3 progressed to inflammatory papules. The lesions lasted 7 months, a result of Kligman's decision not to speed healing by active treatment.
Dow Chemical, in an unexpected plot twist for the ages, actually fired Kligman for this. It's one of the only times in his entire career that Dr. Kligman was held accountable for his apparent disregard for the health and welfare of the human beings enrolled in his program. When asked, Dr. Kligman refused to discuss any of his experiments at Holmesburg, including this one.
All those people could have leukemia now, about 1 chance in 20 billion. And I could be hit by an asteroid when I walk out on the street, but I don't think I will.
Spoken with the serene confidence of a man who was never intentionally injected with live herpes simplex virus or radioactive isotopes. A guy like that could afford to joke about being crushed by an asteroid, could rationalize his own profiteering off the bodies of black men. And why not? I mean, wasn't his paycheck coming from the United States government? Can't get any more legit than that. At right around the same time that Dr. Kligman was cashing checks from the U.S. Army, the CIA, and a whole rogues gallery of pharmaceutical operations, another local academic was about to walk through the gates at Holmesburg Prison. His name was Alan Hornbloom. He was 23 years old and the proud owner of a freshly minted master's degree from Villanova University. Hornbloom arrived at Holmesburg to teach an adult literacy course. It was 1971, and the prison was a chaotic and crowded, reeking hive of noise and filth.
One sight struck him as particularly strange. Scores of men, bare-chested in the heat, their backs and arms striped with gauze pads and adhesive tape.
The sight of that, quite frankly, never left my mind.
Hornbloom wondered if these men were victims of some violent prison riot. But no, the guards explained. Perfume experiments, stuff like that. We rent our bodies to the University of Pennsylvania for cash, some of the inmates said. It all struck Hornbloom as both surreal and even a little bit insane. But everyone at Holmesburg behaved as though this were the most normal thing in the whole wide world. The more questions Hornbloom asked, the more disturbing the answers became. An inmate named Ken Garland told Hornbloom of this experiment.
Researchers offered $50 to each of 6 inmates for allowing them to extract a fingernail. A doctor numbed the inmate's finger with Novocaine, placed it in a vise, and picked up a large pair of pliers. Hell no, not for $50, the panicked prisoners protested. According to Hornbloom, the inmates quietly negotiated a 3-fold pay raise.
$150, which for some of you will more than justify yanking off a fingernail with pliers because late-stage capitalism has turned a lot of us into barking lunatics. Now, much of what Hornbloom learned was actually corroborated by the CIA in its own archives.
Tests were conducted on several hundred inmate volunteers at Holmesburg Prison, the first such prisoner experiments known to have been performed under the Army's program, according to the Army report. The report does say that one experiment in the project at Holmesburg involved high doses of an incapacitating agent, and it says some records indicate that one of the project's purposes was to allow military investigators themselves to experiment on inmates.
One of those inmates was named Johnny Williams. He was serving time on a burglary charge when he became the subject of a very different sort of experiment at Holmesburg Prison.
It was conducted in a padded cell in a laboratory trailer. After an injection, the 250-pound prisoner began hallucinating. He soon flew into a rage, destroying the cell's toilet bowl and shearing the doors off the trailer. Williams told Alan Hornblum that he then fell into a trance-like state for 2 weeks and was troubled by blackouts and violent behavior for years afterward.
Hornblum dug in and found that between 1955 and 1975, the United States Army had been cheerfully testing 254 possible chemical warfare agents on all sorts of unwitting subjects, including their own soldiers, and of course, on prisoners.
The Army contracted with UPenn's program at Holmesburg under Kligman's oversight to evaluate deliriants, drugs that produce confusion, disorganized behavior, and hallucinations.
And sure enough, as Hornblum observed,
prisoners reported double vision, difficulty walking or standing, and visions of ants, faces, and walls flapping like a wind-blown tent.
That's disturbingly specific, isn't it? The ants, in particular. Why ants? Why did all of the men in that experiment hallucinate ants?
The ants go marching one by one, hooray, hurrah. The ants go marching one by one, hooray, hurrah. The ants go marching one by one, the little one stops to suck his thumb, and they all go marching down to the ground to get out of the rain.
Don't think for even a second that any of this was kept secret, that it was something happening in the shadows, because it wasn't. Kligman's work at Holmesburg was often covered by the press in Philadelphia from the CIA's own archives.
A 1963 local news article about some of Dr. Kligman's upcoming Army experiments at Holmesburg, including one in which prisoners were to have limited areas of their skin exposed to small amounts of radioactive isotopes, was written in a highly complimentary tone. When American soldiers and civilians are better protected from the effects of chemical warfare, the story read, it will be thanks to a University of Pennsylvania doctor and several dozen inmate volunteers at Holmesburg Prison.
I mean, you have to be grateful for even this minimal acknowledgement of the contributions these men were making to science, because the truth is, most of the human guinea pigs in this nation's history have never been recognized. Many of them, too many, had no idea what was being done to them. Turns out we're very good in this country at digging unmarked graves. In this one regard, fate was just the littlest bit kinder to the men at Holmesburg Prison. Being fired by Dow Chemical wasn't the only negative consequence Dr. Kligman faced. In 1966, the Food and Drug Administration suspended his privilege to test new drugs. The FDA had found what they called irregularities in Kligman's record keeping, and according to Alan Hornblum, the doctor had also failed to report
a prisoner's severe adverse reaction to a veterinary medication.
No worries, though, because Kligman's colleagues at the University of Pennsylvania rushed to his defense. It took less than a month for the FDA to capitulate and restore Kligman's credentials. In 1974, medical testing was banned at Holmesburg Prison. Dr. Kligman went back to the Retin-A business. He'd licensed his discovery to Johnson & Johnson 3 years earlier, and even though he had to share the patent and the profits with the University of Pennsylvania, there was plenty of money to go around for everyone. And then, a decade later, in 1984, a former Holmesburg inmate named Leodis Jones successfully sued the city of Philadelphia. Jones, who'd lost his job when the factory that employed him abruptly shut down, was charged with receiving stolen goods. He insisted on his innocence and said that he only agreed to be a subject for Kligman to earn the money he needed for bail. His mother begged him to decline, and Jones later wished that he had. The chemical compounds he ingested changed him and his behavior. The city settled out of court, paying Jones $40,000 in damages. The scars carved into his back and his erratic behavior frightened his daughter, who said their entire family was thrown into violence and turmoil thanks to the lasting negative side effects of what had been done to Leotis. 3 years after the death of her father in 2018, his daughter, Adrienne Jones Alston, founded the Jones Foundation for Returning Citizens, which is still today seeking justice for the survivors and their descendants of the Holmesburg Prison medical experiments. In the year 2000, 300 former Holmesburg study participants launched a whopper of a lawsuit against the city of Philadelphia, against Dr. Kligman, Dow Chemical, and Johnson & Johnson for
exposing them to infectious diseases, radioactive isotopes, and psychotic drugs such as LSD without having given informed consent.
You probably won't be shocked to learn that the whole lawsuit got tossed because the court found that the statute of limitations had expired. In 2022, then Mayor of Philadelphia, Jim Kenney, issued a formal apology.
While this happened many decades ago, we know that the historical impact and trauma of this practice of medical racism has extended for generations, all the way through to the present day. One of our administration's priorities is to rectify historic wrongs while we work to build a more equitable future. And to do that, we must reckon with past atrocities. This is why our administration today, on behalf of the city of Philadelphia, is addressing this shameful time in Holmesburg's history. Without excuse, we formally and officially extend a sincere apology to those who were subjected to this inhumane and horrific abuse. We are also sorry it took far too long to hear these words. To the families and loved ones across generations who have been impacted by this deplorable chapter in our city's history, we are hopeful this formal apology brings you at least a small measure of closure. Recognizing the deep distrust experiments like this have created in our communities of color, we vow to continue to fight the inequities and disparities that continue to this day.
I'd do it all again.
The thing is, none of the Holmesburg experiments were harmless. Even that first one, the one that dealt with athlete's foot. One of the inmates that participated in that, Alphonse Skorsky, said that after having his right foot coated in some kind of powder, then sealed in an airtight plastic covering for 2 weeks, he was left with nerve damage so severe that he could no longer walk without dragging that foot.
So much that seemed benign, but was accompanied by constant biopsies and frequent painful procedures.
At the time, research for national defense was a very honorable thing to do. That was before the CIA became a dirty word.
And everyone stops to say,
We've all benefited from Dr. Kligman's experiments on the inmates at Holmesburg. We have toothpaste, deodorant, night cream, acne, and anti-aging medications.
If you remember obsessing over Teen Magazine quizzes, it may be time for Neutrogena Retinol Regenerating Cream. With accelerated retinol complex, it helps to maximize retinol's full potential while minimizing skin irritation. Reverse years of aging with one jar.
Dr. Kligman was a wealthy man, thanks not only to his 23 years of well-funded human experiments, but to the absolute cash printing machine that was tretinoin. Retin-A, retinol, call it by any of its names. It was a $22.3 billion business last year alone. clear, youthful-looking skin, something we're all too happy to pay for, obviously. In 2006, 4 years before his death, the man who refused to have any real discussion about the harms that resulted from his years at Holmesburg Prison had this to say to the New York Times.
My view is that shutting the prison experiments down was a big mistake. I still don't see there having been anything wrong with what we were doing.
Nowadays, we like to get very defensive about stories like this. We didn't do anything wrong. We weren't even there. We didn't know. Why are you trying to make us feel guilty for the sins of our ancestors? Boy, that's sure a familiar refrain, isn't it? One that we haul out and dust off seemingly anytime someone vulnerable or oppressed or on the margins has the audacity to point out the boot prints on their neck. Not us, it wasn't us. And it wasn't. We didn't do it. We weren't there. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't know that it happened, how it happened, and to whom. So that we've recognized the harm, so that we prevent it from happening that way ever again. So that we acknowledge the sacrifices made by people we will never know, what was literally taken from their very flesh, so that our own lives might be a little safer or more comfortable or even just a little prettier. Is doing that one thing so hard? Is it that unthinkable? I mean, I don't love knowing that other human beings were scarred for life to minimize my fine lines any more than you do. This is why the truth so often finds herself called names like uncomfortable and painful and ugly. It's why we hide from her and then holler like Brer Rabbit himself when she finds us cowering in the dark. We really would just rather not know. But we do. Thanks to one determined and relentless individual, Alan Hornblum, who may have arrived at Holmesburg Prison to teach adult literacy, but swiftly changed course and began a research project of his own.
Because I witnessed it and saw it in the flesh, literally. It always impacted me as something that was unethical, immoral, and never should have been broached. What I found out and documented in Acres of Skin is that even though there were other states that allowed this to happen, and many prisons that did experiments, there was nothing like what occurred in the Philadelphia prison system.
Nothing like what happened at Holmesburg Prison. And, shock and awe, it all came down to money, as it so often does.
University of Pennsylvania never should have gotten involved with this, and never should have allowed their dermatology department and one of their most important dermatologists to do this. But they all did it, especially Penn, because they were making so much money from it, and it benefited them greatly. In fact, it still is. They're still making money from Retin-A, and Johnson & Johnson is still making money.
Retin-A cream, new. 20 times more effective at brightening the skin.
And all of that glowing goodness brought to you by a brilliant doctor with flexible ethics. A university happy to look the other way while the profits poured in. The Department of Defense and their weird buddies at the CIA. Plus, a couple thousand desperate prison inmates in the city of brotherly love. Every living thing in the world is connected. You've heard that how many times? Bet you didn't know how recently that whole idea became a thing. Bet you'd never guess how that whole idea exploded into pop culture. And what in the world is the creator of the CIA's lie detector interrogation program even doing in this story? He's polygraphing the houseplants on the next True Weird Stuff.
Special thanks to our voice talents on this episode: Sam Moore, Aaron Cox, Carrie, Doc Bowser, and Don Morgan. Sherry, the subject of so many episodes of this podcast has been brilliant doctor with questionable ethics.
Boy, howdy.
We seem to laud intellect more than we do ethics sometimes. But you can see that this is what I love the fact that this doctor and doctors in other episodes, way after the fact, when questioned about it, go, yeah, I mean, yeah, I'd do it again. There was no reflection back to say, really, this was awful what we did. And what's really awful was the ethical things that we did and the racial component to this. All of those things. It's sickening to think that somebody looks back and goes, yeah, that still doesn't bother me.
And there are people that, because these men were inmates, there are people that are like, that's why I called it out in the episode. There are people that are like, yeah, screw it. Do the crime, do the time. At some point, we have to be human beings, like first, right? We have to be human beings who recognize that we're tormenting other human beings. But look what Dr. Kligman told his classes of med students at the University of Pennsylvania. The rules do not apply to genius. And he really believed it and lived it. So in that regard, you have to hand it to him. He was consistent, right?
Right.
He did not think that the rules applied to him. And I will say, you could have knocked me over with a feather when I learned that my Neutrogena rapid repair night serum or whatever, this is its birthplace. Did you know any of that?
No, I did. I had no idea. Now, I have gone through, there is a prison in Philadelphia that's a museum now. It's called Eastern State Penitentiary. And what you described at the beginning, where you had this sort of pinwheel thing. So what the idea is, the spoken wheel, the idea is you have all of the guards and whatnot in the center of it so they can look down the hallways of where all the cells are to be able to see what's going on. And so I was able to kind of get an idea of what this prison was like given the year that it was built. And it is just, I mean, it's the most deplorable place to begin with. But add to this what they were doing and taking advantage of people who were trying to get money for family or to just simply get bail so they could get out and take advantage of that and not really care what it was that they were doing to them. And when they realized it, not giving them the proper treatment to try to deal with the damage that had been caused.
There's so much here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much here. And yeah, it's true that in our 250 years as a country, boy, we have packed a lot in terms of sketchy doctors and weird CIA experiments. You would think, like, I did not set out to, I would like to do a podcast on weird CIA shit. It's just everywhere you look. It's like, oh, it's acne medication. There's the CIA.
This is another one. This has shown up. I don't know how many episodes of this podcast, but at least a half a dozen of some weird shit that the CIA was involved in, and you go, really? Didn't somebody say you really shouldn't be doing that?
It's at the point now where my laptop, I type the letter CIAR in search and my computer's like, oh, the CIA reading room, welcome back.
Well, and the of all the things, of course, the talc that was in the powder, Sherry, as you were telling that, all I could think about was when I was a baby, my brother, who was maybe about 3 years older than me, so he was, I don't know, maybe 4 at the time. My parents had some friends over, and while they had the friends over, my brother was busy in the bedroom, out of their sight, taking talcum powder and dumping it all over top of me.
Oh,
and when my parents heard some noises and they said, our guest left immediately. But my father says, when I looked down at you, all I could see was white and then you opened your eyes. So if you can, it's almost like from a horror movie. And all I could think of, all that talc that I ingested during that time, that all I can think about and the kind of damage that could do.
Well, and I have to say, like, they didn't change their baby powder formula till 1999.
Nope.
So you were getting old school Johnson & Johnson baby powder. Most people listening to this right now knew that there was some controversy with baby powder, right? You knew that. You knew there were lawsuits. You knew that there was something about baby powder that was causing cancer. But you probably never really knew the grainy details of oh, it's this talc lives in the earth next to this specific form of asbestos. That never came out on the nightly news because it would be considered boring and tangential, and the American public don't care about facts like that. But I think that we do care about facts like that if we're aware that these facts exist, right? So there are a couple of things about the Johnson & Johnson component in this story that should piss you off. One,
can we get to those in just a minute?
Oh yeah, do we have to break? Yeah,
we have to break.
Okay,
we have to break.
Time.
That's all right.
Break.
Okay, and then you can tell us about.
Then
the
I can piss you off. Yeah.
Oh
my God, I'm so excited!
Oh,
don't go away. I'm going to piss you off next. Okay, so here's the deal that with Johnson & Johnson. One, they've never admitted to any of this, which isn't surprising because #greed. But they knew about this for so freaking long. They knew that asbestos was a carcinogen in the 1930s. They knew that when they tested samples, they were testing positive for asbestos. And they kept selling it, even though they knew. So they knew for decades before they changed the formula and replaced talc with cornstarch. And I remember when they made that change, listening to people complain that Johnson's baby powder was different now and not as good. And I'm like, it is different. You're no longer sprinkling a known carcinogen on your baby's booty and yourself. Like, what? Yes, it's different, and that's a good thing. But I want you to think about what it meant that company profited this way, knowing what they were selling to the American public. And if not for the reporters at Reuters who would not let this story go, they'd still be selling it. And if you think otherwise, my sweet child, please come sit next to me because I could use a dose of your goodness. They would still be selling it. And in all of the noise and chaos about the Johnson & Johnson lawsuits back in the day, if you think Johnson & Johnson threw a hand up and volunteered, yeah, but we were dumping it all over inmates in Philly. Of course they didn't. Nobody ever talks about this. Nobody. And the thing with Kligman and the Johnson & Johnson trials, he wasn't just like changing their britches and sprinkling it on them. He was injecting them with talcum powder and 2 different kinds of asbestos via injection. So I guess since I'm not a scientist or a doctor, I guess I'm confused by that.
Boy, the CIA was really, they were really obsessed with LSD, weren't they? They were obsessed with this idea of mind control. Yeah. And by the time they were doing these experiments, because as I look back in their in the script here, by the time they were doing that, they knew that large amounts of LSD could be potentially really harmful, not just for mind control, but really harmful to the person they were doing it. They knew that for a fact by that point. So the one story that you told is very upsetting, that the idea that they injected this poor man with so much of this.
Well, what they did, I mean, we did an episode called Trippin' Johns on the sex workers that were recruited to dose men with LSD and then, seduce them and interrogate them. We did a whole episode on that. We did an episode on the mind control experiments that the CIA funded at Ravenscroft Hospital. We have never done the story of what happened in Michigan at Ionia State Hospital, where they spent years pumping LSD into 140 of those patients. But all of this, you can circle all of this back around over and over and over again, and we see the same thing, whether it's 1920 or 1970 or 1990 or whatever, we see the same thing. They're prisoners, so who cares?
Right.
They're defective, so who cares? They can't say no because they are suffering from an extremely difficult mental health episode, so who cares? They're children. Who cares? Does it not bother anyone that this man strolled into a hospital for profoundly disabled children in Philadelphia, scraped their scalps raw and rubbed ringworm in? Is that not a problem for anyone?
And all I can think is the words where he said, "I'd do it all again." I mean, he took advantage of the most defenseless among us.
Yeah.
And just for financial gain. I mean, let's not say that this was because he really cared that much about the science. This is for financial gain.
He made a fortune. They all did. To this day, when you buy a product that contains tretinoin, and many people are using, like, I know people that get prescription tretinoin and apply it to their face because it kind of it's an anti-aging. It's a miracle freaking thing. It's amazing. Okay. And like, if you've had your acne treated with it, if you're using any one of the gazillion skincare products that contain tretinoin, you know how good it is. Bet you didn't know that a portion of the money you spend on that product goes right to the University of Pennsylvania to this day. Did you know that?
Did not know that. I didn't know that.
They strong-armed Kligman and Fulton, and they own part of the patent. I think half of the patent. And many, there's been a lot of conversation around medical ethics and human experimentation and biomedical ethics, where it's argued that the University of Pennsylvania should relinquish this and own publicly where this money in large part, is coming from.
Are you surprised that when some of this stuff came out to light and the mayor of Philadelphia was, making this speech that's in this, aren't you surprised that there wasn't more of an outcry against the University of Pennsylvania about this?
I think there would have been if these had not been black male inmates. And I also want to say about Philadelphia Mayor Tom Kenny, who formally apologized. One of Philly's most legendary mayors, Frank Rizzo, would have stepped up to the microphone, grabbed his own balls, shook them at the TV cameras, and walked away. He would not have apologized for anything. So it was kind of a big deal for the city of Philadelphia to step up in this way. But, we live in, and people get really mad. I don't know why y'all get so worked up when somebody points out that we have systemic racism in this country, because we do. Well, wasn't me. I didn't do it. My ancestors. Well, I know you didn't do it. I know it wasn't you. But we can, it wasn't us, but we can still point to it and go, yeah, it's a thing. Because you can be damn sure there would have been an uproar if they were doing unlawful medical experiments without consent on the wealthy sons of powerful people at a boarding school. For real, Max, come on.
Seriously. And the other thing is there is a mindset in this country. And do I think we need to have a justice system where we take people off the streets and send them to prison for crimes? Absolutely. But when you put them in a prison, it does not mean that they have ceased to be a human being. It's almost like, well, we warehoused them there. They screwed up and, lock them up and throw away the key. There is very little sense of rehabilitation in there. So you're talking, the reason that these guys were so vulnerable to this is because there is very little sense of rehabilitation. And the only person that was coming in and bringing some rehabilitation came in and looked around and went, there's something really screwed up about what's going on here, and thank God for him, Hornblum. Yeah.
Alan Hornblum is the hero. Some of these stories don't have a hero. You're like, my God, this is a parade of bad guys. Is there not a single white hat? But no, he's the hero of this story.
Anyhow, but that's all I wanted to say.
Well, the thing about Holmesburg Prison that, and it's why I highlighted it and pointed it out, because even good, decent people that you feel like will suddenly completely dehumanize an incarcerated person if they consider the crime nasty enough. You know what I'm talking about.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm no fan of, the dude, Chris Watson, the dude who killed his family in Colorado.
Right.
I'm not advocating for him to have an ice cream sundae and a foot rub every night, but he's a human being. And if we're going to maintain our humanity, we have to think about the way that we treat incarcerated people. And the thing with Holmesburg Prison, and why I thought it was important to point out that these were not the worst of the worst. These were people, in most cases, that were trying to make bail.
Yeah, it was interesting to me and of course, I don't know how they separated them out, but usually people who have not been convicted yet in a court of law, that they generally are not thrown in with the same people that in other words, they usually are put in jails, then they're convicted, then they're sent to a prison. So I guess they mixed them together there. I don't know.
Well, what you're describing is kind of new, honestly. It's kind of a modern thinking about prison. Like we have county lockup and then we have ADX Supermax, right? So, and Philadelphia has a super interesting part to play in the history of corrections in the United States of America. Philadelphia has a really interesting role. The Quakers in Philadelphia were very early on the idea of prison should be rehabilitation, not punishment, that we should want to return people to society where they can be productive and contributing. That should be the goal of incarceration, not just lock them up, warehouse them, punish them, and experiment on them and hope to God they die while they're there so you don't have to keep feeding them.
And they did that at Eastern State Penitentiary. I mean, there was, and you're right, the Quakers were hugely influential on that. And they, it was looked at, Eastern State Penitentiary, which was in Philadelphia as well, was looked at as kind of like the flag bearer on let's try to rehabilitate people. They tried to do things with the inmates where they would punish them and not let them speak and all kinds of things. But I think you're right. The people realize that, yeah, you get a sentence. That means somebody's going to be out in 7 years. Well, they're going to be out. Well, who are we turning back out into the community?
Yeah.
And do we care about what's happened to them while they're in there? Or, this is why you get repeat offenders. This is why this happens so often.
My husband said to me, I forget how we even got on the subject, but he said to me, I don't feel good about private prisons. I think that's a bad idea. And I, if you think about what he's saying, he's like, a private prison is an institution or organization that goes into business, remains in business, and is profitable for its shareholders by doing what capitalism does, which is constant growth and maximizing of profits. So a for-profit prison would by virtue of the way it's constructed, have zero interest in rehabilitation, right? I mean, we don't make any money if we rehabilitate and release. Our money comes from warehousing people, and the more people we can warehouse, the better. So the more people we can cram into these private prisons, the more profits will be made for the private ownership. It's when you step back from it, it doesn't have to be a disaster, but you can see how it's ripe for all sorts of bad stuff.
Yes,
you can see it.
And when it comes to even with the state, if you were having a state prison, I mean, I'm not sure how this happens at the federal level, but I know with a state prison, bad economic times, let's cut budget. What's the first thing to go? The prison. And a lot of times, the first thing to go is any rehabilitative programs at the prison because they're going, well, let's cut this. We've got to save some money somewhere. Who's going to fight for those inmates? The inmates can't. They can't. They can't vote. They rarely have any kind of voice that anybody wants to listen to. And yet, that's what happens. And that's when you're not for profit. Imagine what would happen if you had a for-profit prison.
And this is where, I've got to take my tinfoil hat off and put my MSW, my social worker hat on and just say, listen, we dehumanize our incarcerated brothers and sisters at the risk of dehumanizing ourselves. That our humanity has to extend to all human beings, even the ones that do really stupid things, even the ones that we feel are vile and awful and unsafe to walk our streets. Our humanity still has to extend to those people, because when we start picking and choosing who on the menu is human, we need to understand that someone may decide we are not human.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense.
And I know that y'all are like, here comes Susie woke kumbaya. Well, yeah, I don't pretend to be otherwise. I'm just saying, I'm out here fighting for your humanity, and you're not an asshole. And if you become one, I'm still going to fight for your humanity because you're a human being.
And
we have to kind of do that.
I'm going to say this, and I never talk about this, but I've done volunteer work in prisons. I know what I'm talking about. I know what I'm talking about at the most basic level with this. And I also can tell you something else. When you connect with human beings and you reach them in their absolute humanity in that situation, you can see miraculous things happen in people's lives, and you can see that they can turn it around, and that can happen. But it can only happen if you have another human being in front of them to help them, to be able to guide them, to be able to inspire them at any point along the line. That's not something the state's going to pay for. Not generally. That's something that only volunteers can do. But you do get to see up close that can indeed happen. My reason for saying this in this moment is you see people's humanness. You see that they're not all psychopaths and sociopaths, and that there are people in there, as you said, they make mistakes. They were drunk. They were high. Yes, they made those decisions. But who among us hasn't made stupid decisions drunk or high?
And got lucky.
And got lucky. That's it.
So I'm so thankful that you shared this, because I'm very protective of your privacy, and I know that you like to keep that part of your life private, because Max is one of the 7 people on earth who believes that if you're going to really try to do good, you shouldn't try to make it about you. So he's one of the holy 7, right? But I know that Max has worked with individuals who have gotten out and turned their lives around so dramatically to become forces for good in this world. And yeah, I might be like kumbaya, but my daddy did time in prison, the prison that they filmed Scared Straight in. Used to be called Rawway.
Yeah.
It's in New Jersey. And he came out just as bad as he went in. He was a terrible person who was imprisoned and came out an equally terrible person. There was no magic there. But because of his incarceration in a very hardcore setting, I saw a lot of things. And I'm glad that I saw all of them, because it's just a reminder that you've made mistakes that didn't end catastrophically. I know so many people that have driven after drinking, and they shouldn't have, and it's a damn wonder that they got away with it. And so do you.
Yeah.
So do you.
But the difference with your father didn't want to change. He had no desire to change.
No.
So
and there are people that don't.
There are people that don't. You're right.
But I still extend them their humanity. And you just have to ask yourself, and I know people are so angry now, and we are so siloed, and we've become, at a time of technological amazeballness, we've become really primitive and tribal. And I understand that. And I know that we want to draw the wagons and, characterize people as not worth saving or too terrible to consider, and all of it. And a lot of that is most of it's rooted in fear and ignorance. Ignorance not being the same thing as stupidity, because ignorance you can fix. Stupidity, God bless your heart. I mean, we're all just made how we are, but it's rooted in fear and ignorance. And so, we don't want to recognize that these inmates in this particular prison were human beings. They were sons and brothers and fathers and husbands, and they were carpenters and sailors and the full breadth of humanity. And they screwed up, and they made a mistake. They couldn't make bail. And now they're being injected with Agent Orange. Mm. If that seems okay to you, you might want to shoot us an email. We'll recommend some other podcasts you might enjoy more. I don't know how to, what's that saying? I don't know how to tell you to care about other people. I don't know how to explain to you that all people are human, even the ones you don't like.
It's very easy it's very easy to make blanket statements about people in these situations. That, oh, well, they're all in prison. Well, they're this, or well, they're that. That is an easy way to do it. And as long as you do that, you will never rehabilitate the people that are in there. It just won't happen. If you go, I don't want to think about it, there will be no rehabilitation.
One of the things I've learned from your work in that space, so Max and I have been working together pretty much since puberty for me. Like, we've been together for a long time.
Seems like that, yeah.
And one thing that I've observed in all those years is there aren't people telling Max I was railroaded. There are people saying I did this thing and I deeply regret it and I want to be better. Not in every case, of course, because there are always people that are dickheads. But Max never has come with like, well, here's somebody that insists, he doesn't belong there. Because those aren't, when you're really in that room with those human beings, it's not a TV show or a movie, is it, Max? It's not that.
No, it's not. And the other thing about it is I'm not an advocate. I don't go in there to advocate for those things. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not doing a podcast where I'm trying to find people that are wrongly incarcerated. I know there's successful podcasts. That's not why I do that. I'm trying to try to help them to try to perhaps better themselves. And when you do find people that do have that desire, but just don't have any place to go with that desire. And that's the thing.
And this particular story is one of the most muddy, gray, difficult versions of these kinds of true tales, because a lot of what came out of those Holmesburg experiments has been really good and life-changing for people. Ringworm, which has been dogging human beings since we emerged, it was the work that was done at the University of Pennsylvania that helped identify and treat before it could become, so miserable for the child or the adult who had it, because it's contagious as hell, before it could spread through the whole wrestling team, which is where a lot of ringworm from, is high school wrestling and those kinds of environments. Athlete's foot. I don't know what it's like. I've never had it, but it sounds horrifying. And all the products that you can go to the drugstore and buy, and those are things that don't really seem all that, oh, well, he helped ringworm. People are debilitated by acne. People's lives are ruined by severe acne. And tretinoin is not just a vanity thing, like, oh, well, your skin is going to look better. It's a drug that's been used to treat people with leukemia. So here we have a guy who's like, I think it was a mistake to not let people experiment on prisoners, and I would do it again, and nana boo boo. For all of that, you're like, well, damn. I mean, a lot of really good stuff came out of this terrible thing. And so this is like everything else. It's not so black and white, is it?
No. There's never any easy answers with any of this.
Just like when you first hear, well, they were experimenting on inmates in Philly. You're like, who cares? They're inmates. Don't do the crime. Nobody will experiment on you. But when you take one level down and you go, wait a minute. They were doing this to these people for $10? Didn't even tell them. These weren't like mass murderers and terrorists, you guys. One of the men in this story was wrongly arrested and sent to Holmesburg. He was acquitted. Like, it was a mistaken identity thing. Well, they shouldn't have taken the money for the experiments.
But but here's the thing. Your
kids are home and your kids are home and there's no food on that table.
Right. So what am I going to do? You're going to take care of your family as best you can.
Yeah. Your kids are home and you're going to lose your job if you can't make bail. And here's a chance to make bail. Like, be a human being for a minute and stop and consider how complicated and difficult all the choices here are for everyone involved. But buddy, do we like to whip it around? They were inmates. They deserved it.
And we don't know what they were being told. They were being told, well, it's not that bad. Oh, nothing bad's going to really happen. You might have some discomfort. You might have a rash. I mean, who knows what they were being told ahead of time? They weren't telling, hey, there might be dire consequences to this.
No, they weren't.
You can bet they weren't being told that.
And you can take that as fact, because when Alan Hornbloom first arrived at Holmesburg Prison to teach literacy and was shocked by the surreal, can you imagine how surreal it would be to walk into a prison and all of the men are covered in bandages and gauze? Like, what the what?
Would we raise some concerns?
What? So Hornbloom began talking to the prisoners, who themselves told him, oh, we ran out our bodies to test perfumes and sunscreen and stuff. None of those men knew that they were being injected with dioxin and live herpes and radioactive isotopes.
I mean, come on.
Yeah. So, and that is not to say you don't need to feel guilty for using tretinoin, retinol, retin-A, because I'm not sure. You pry it out of my hands. I love that stuff. Right there with you.
But Sherry, can I point out that this Dr. Kligman was a man, in your words, as you got it, obsessed with fungi. Can I tell you, even Dr. Kligman probably got a woman.
Oh yeah, he had no
first date.
Listen,
I am obsessed with fungi.
He was so obsessed with fungi and mushrooms that his first degree was in that, and then he became a dermatologist. So the guy was, when I said brilliant with flexible ethics, I meant brilliant. He really was. And we need people that are brilliant and obsessed with fungus so that we can find a treatment for ringworm. We just don't need to find that treatment for ringworm by torturing disabled children. Can we all agree on that, or is that too woke?
No.
Can we all agree that was a shit show?
Yeah.
And of course, those kids at that time in that institution in Philadelphia were being warehoused as, it's the D word, defectives, which you've heard on this podcast before as part of this whole weird eugenics thread that runs through the history of this country, and periodically raises its head to remind us that we still treat human beings as though some of us are more disposable than others. Now, next week on True Weird Stuff, the CIA, man, I'll spend some time with the CIA, and then I'm like, boys, I got to go find a vampire because y'all are so scary and you're real. But we're going to tell the story of the lie detector, the polygraph machine, which has a much more colorful history than you know. And it's connected to the CIA, as everything is in America, including like your mother's underwear drawer. The CIA's in there somewhere, I promise you. But the man who is credited, like the big daddy of the lie detector, is the same man that sort of kicked off the woo-woo 1970s, everything that is alive is connected to everything that's alive. And it is such a funky and wild story that even though the CIA shows up in it, I was like, all right, but only because you're only in it for a minute and you didn't kill anybody this time will I allow the CIA back next week.
I am looking forward to this.
Otherwise, CIA, you know what? You go sit on the bottom step and you think about what you did. And when you're ready to apologize, you can be in another True Weird Stuff episode. So we are making an exception for the man who polygraphed plants. And that's next week on True Weird Stuff. Thank you so much for listening. And I'd also say, I should have said this sooner, but we're terrible at promotion and marketing. True Weird Stuff is up for 2 Signal Awards. The Doomsday Clock episode is up for Best History Podcast in a field of competitors so astonishing that I'm pretty sure we don't have a chance. And Max is up for editing all the soundscaping and world building and production that he does on these episodes, also for the Doomsday clock, which is one of my favorite things that Max has ever done. And there's a listener choice voting component that closes on October 9th. So if you hear this before October 9th, 2025, if you could pop over to our website, trueweirdstuff.com, there's a voting link there. I don't have a chance in hell for us to win the best history podcast, but my money is on Max because he deserves this. And I have to tell you guys, he's competing against Batman.
So
can you help an underdog out?
So
it's Max versus Batman.
That's
in the Signal Awards Listener's Choice category. Thank you so much for listening and for making something like I just described even possible. We were over the moon when we got that news.
Yeah, we're very excited.
We were just we're so proud of Max and we're so excited for him and we want him to win, something because he deserves everything. Again, we'll see you next week and thank you for listening.
And if you listen to us on Apple Podcasts, hit the plus button in the top right corner. And now it helps an independent podcast like ours to get discovered. And we really appreciate it if you subscribe, rate, and review True Weird Stuff.
Hit our website, trueweirdstuff.com, for show notes and photos and videos when we have it and bonus content. Everything True Weird is waiting for you at trueweirdstuff.com.
And follow True Weird Stuff on Instagram.
True Weird Stuff is a Now Media production. Our executive producer is Anthony Garcia. The show is written and hosted by me, Sherry Lynch, along with my deeply weird director, Max Sweeten. Our equally odd producer is Carrie Bowser. Additional production by the mysterious Stephen Call. Our digital witch and social media cult leader is Heather Furr. Original graphics by Kevin Nash. Original artworks by Olivia Axlin. True Weird original music composed and performed by Jack Griffin and Zane Nash. Copyright 2025 Now Media. All rights reserved. All wrongs remembered.